What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's going on with NIO, Tesla, SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I want to break down what's happening with the economic calendar thus far, what's happening with earnings, which are very, very important, what's happening with other things involving NIO. But before I break down all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am firstly not a financial planner. Take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moon link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moon, deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and the offer ends very, very soon. Anyways, when it comes to NIO is currently up 2.8% for the day thus far. We saw this thing drop a little bit when we opened before getting a nice bounce. And now we're going to be testing our 50 EMA at least as our resistance. On the 4-hour time frame, the MACD is curling, and that is actually looking pretty good. With that happening, if we get a break of about 5.64, we could be looking for a bigger push to the upside. But overall, I would say that it's looking pretty nice so far. We got some nice earnings. I'm going to be talking about all of this in just a couple of minutes. But I first want to talk about the overall market because tomorrow is going to be another important day with Jerome Powell giving a speech. I'm going to talk about that first before I break down NIO, so just hold up for a couple of minutes. So tomorrow is going to be Wednesday, March 6th, and we have some data coming out at 10 o'clock a.m. We have Jerome Powell giving a testimony, which is going to be very important. We also have the jobs openings and quits data coming out at the same time. But Jerome Powell's testimony in front of the House is going to be very important. This is going to cause some big volatility in the markets. After that, there's not really much coming out except for the Fed Beige Book, which is going to give us a report about how things are looking from the Fed. And we also have a couple of speeches like Kashkari and Daly around noon and 3 p.m. So we'll be watching to see what happens with the Fed's speeches. Also, the Fed Beige Book is coming out. It'll give us more insights on what the Fed is thinking. But besides that, the main thing that's going to affect the markets is Jerome Powell. He's going to be testifying in front of the House on Wednesday, which is going to be tomorrow at 10 a.m. He's going to be going to Washington, D.C. to do so, and it's going to be very, very important. Now, whatever Jerome Powell ends up saying will have a big effect on the markets. He could say something that involves monetary policy, and that's what the market's going to be waiting for. There are going to be a lot of questions about the markets and the current state of the economy. He's going to talk a lot about employment, apparently, and also any rate cuts. So we'll be watching to see if he gives us any hints about rate cuts or anything like that, and we'll be watching to see how this goes. We don't know. I know that Jerome Powell is going to say things that are just like very, very ambiguous for sure, but he could say some comments here and there that shake the markets. So we'll just have to wait and see what Jerome Powell says in the daytime. But for now, another thing worth noting is going to be earnings. We just had NIO announce its earnings in the morning today. I'll talk about that in just a minute. I first want to talk about these earnings just real quick. CrowdStrike actually saw a big push in the share price because they had very strong full year guidance and they beat on EPS and revenue. They beat on EPS with 95 cents, beat on revenue with 845 million, and they did relatively well when it comes to their guidance, so it's good for them. That's for CrowdStrike. ChargePoint, however, had very, very interesting earnings. They did end up beating on some estimates for EPS. Revenue was pretty good, but unfortunately, their overall guidance is not the strongest in my opinion, and their margins are not that great either. So with that being said, the share price still dropped despite this, and that's because of their guidance and their margins. Ross, on the other hand, they announced earnings. They're very flat after earnings came out, and that's despite the fact that earnings were kind of decent. They were so-so. They beat on their EPS forecast. They also got a nice improvement on EPS. Earnings have been improving gradually every single quarter. We're seeing nice growth so far, which is looking pretty good. And on top of this, we're looking at nice changes as well. So good changes, good growth, nice guidance. We're showing some strength. So good from Ross. That's a pretty good sign. Anyways, enough about Ross and these other stocks out there. Let's focus on NIO. How is NIO doing? So we just had their fourth quarter earnings. Not bad whatsoever. They did over $2 billion in revenue, which is not bad as well. And that's USD that I'm referring to, by the way. A 4.6% from the 4.6% increase from the fourth quarter of 2022. Looking at the numbers, we have some very nice charts posted by China EV Post, so huge shout out to them. They gave us some nice charts we could actually go over. So one thing that is pretty decent about their earnings is the fact that we had some decent guidance for deliveries. So now, even though this would be a decrease for the quarter, typically Q1 is not the strongest for them because of what tends to happen with Chinese New Year, but we're expecting a range of 31,000 to 33,000 deliveries. But remember, January came out already, so did February, and January and February are not the strongest of months for them in terms of their overall deliveries. January was okay at 10,000, but February saw a little bit of a decline. But now they're telling us that, hey, for Q1, when the quarter ends for this year, okay, they're going to have 31 to 33,000. That implies that for the month of March, to achieve that, they're going to have close to 13 to 15,000 deliveries in the month of March. If that ends up being the case, we'll be watching to see some very, very nice changes. Anyways, we'll see if that ends up being the case. Right now, quarterly revenue is coming down just a little bit, but it's not the worst whatsoever. And we're going to be looking to see if there are any improvements from there. But this is looking pretty good. On top of this, I just want to call out that their deliveries for the quarter did come down a little bit in Q4, but compared to the previous Q4, it's not bad. They had a very strong Q3, if anything. We're going to be expecting another decrease in their quarterly deliveries, so don't be too surprised by that. But typically, Q1 is a little bit weaker for them. You guys could see this historically. Q1 is not always the strongest, even in 2020. This has to do with Chinese New Year, so we are expecting a little decrease over there, but overall, not bad. When it comes to their gross margins, this was not as good for them. So their gross margins are still actually the same as what we got previously. But we're hoping for a slight improvement because they're going to be working on expanding their power network and improving other factors and cutting costs even more. Quarterly vehicle margins went up a little bit, not as bad. It's a slight improvement right here. So let's hope they continue to do so. So that's actually some good news for them. And their net loss went up just a little bit in Q4. We're hoping that these losses drop a little bit as they start cutting costs. Expenses are still going up as they're expanding. That has to do with expansions, not to mention the fact that they're not profitable yet. And besides that, I would say pretty good earnings because what's good is they beat on EPS, they beat on revenue. That's good. Overall guidance is showing an increase in deliveries in March, which is good. Their margins were kind of like the same as before, not the best. So that's like in the middle. And other things were kind of in the middle from their margin per vehicle and things like that. So pretty good earnings, not the strongest, but still pretty good. Morgan Stanley maintains an overweight rating on NIO despite that. So that's a good piece of news. And then on top of this, I just want to mention that we had about 94 million in volume. It dropped at first, but then got a nice bounce because once again, earnings were kind of mixed, but pretty good in my opinion. We saw a slight improvement as we saw a little bit more shorting that was going on yesterday. Despite that, NIO is still holding up. So 7% short volume. And then besides that, JP Morgan has downgraded NIO from a neutral to an underweight rating. Besides that, the price-price ratio has come down just a little bit. NIO was underperforming, but I think today it bounced a little bit because NIO started to outperform. And then when it comes to seasonality, Wednesdays do tend to be green about 55% of the time, one of the strongest days of the week for NIO. So let's hope you have a good day. Anyways, that is it for my analysis on the other things. Let's talk about the charts now. I'm going to be kind of quick with this. So honestly, guys, with Jerome Powell giving his speech, that's going to be the main highlight of tomorrow. Whatever he says is going to affect the markets. Now, from a technical standpoint, NIO looks bullish. It does look like it could be testing 5.64 soon and eventually get close to $6 again. For a little drop in a bounce, this is like a liquidity sweep for them to like drop it, buy it up at these low prices and start pushing it back up. So the chart looks bullish. It looks like it's going to push a little higher. So there's a good chance it's going to try to push. NIO looks bullish overall, but SPY, on the other hand, is barely holding the 50 EMA at 506. If we lose this again and we fail to get a nice, enough buyers to defend it, especially at 505, I think we could go all the way down to 502. So be very, very careful. 503.5 and then 502 are possibilities, even 502 if we get another rug pull. Now, if we bounce, watch 509. There is a risk of us coming all the way down to 502, then bouncing. But I just want to be clear with you. I can't solely predict this because it depends on what Jerome Powell says. I just don't know what he's going to say. So we'll just have to wait and see. The market will react to whatever he says during his testimony. So there is a risk of us coming lower, but just to be safe, watch your levels. On Tesla has dropped quite a bit, but it's trying to hold around 178. We did close above 180, which is a good sign. So there is a chance that Tesla could try to rebound a little bit and retest 182. If we break that, 184 is next. I'm hoping we do get a little rebound, but this will depend on the news and also on what Jerome Powell says. So just wait and see if we get a bounce or not. There is some potential for that to end up playing out. For a couple more tickers, we also have Aapl. Aapl, in my opinion, is still looking very weak. We're still barely holding 170. If we do get a bounce here, we could try to return to at least 172.5, but we'll see if we get a bounce or not. So if we do end up losing 170, we could sink lower, but we'll see how it goes. But just to be safe, okay, in order for this to play out, we have to wait and see what happens with Jerome Powell's speech. That's also going to affect Aapl. If Aapl gets a bounce here, it's going to help the whole market, but we have to wait and see just to be safe. For the QQQ, the chart looks kind of weak. It was trying to bounce off 433, very close to this support right here. excuse me, if we break 437.87, I think 440 is coming next. If we reject off this, we could come down lower. It does look like it may attempt to defend this area depending on what Powell says. We're kind of bearish on the 4 hour, but we have to see if this turns or not. If we reject, we could actually sink to about 433 again. If we lose that, 430s next, and a bounce could come. It all depends on Powell. This does look to me like it's going to try to kind of bounce a little bit and may make an attempt to bounce, so just be careful. This is showing some more strength, at least at the very end of the day, than other tickers. So with that happening, we will see if Jerome Powell helps this thing pump again. We have a big gap to fill, but nothing is guaranteed until we hear what Jerome Powell has to say. With Nvda is still on a nice uptrend. It's trying to reject just a little bit. We got this rejection, so we have to try to break above 865 to remain bullish. If we lose this, we could be testing 833. Overall, it's just kind of range bound, so it may remain range bound until Powell gives his speech. Then we'll see what happens. If we break 876, 900 is coming. If we end up losing the support right here at 843, watch for 833 coming next. It's a little bit weak, but at the end of the day, some buyers are trying to defend it, so we'll have to see how it goes from here. But with that being said, I just want to thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have an absolutely incredible rest of the day. Please remain calm, cool, and connected, and I'll see you guys very soon on the next one. Thank you for listening. The market to the moon because the long term is very bright, and peace out.